It was just after midnight when I first heard it. Not loud, not urgent. Just 3 soft knocks spaced evenly, like whoever was at the door wasn't in a hurry. The kind of knock you almost ignore the first time, assuming it's something else. I was 25, living alone in a small rental house at the end of a quiet street, and nothing like this had ever happened before. Nights were usually silent, peaceful even. That's why the sound stood out so much. There was nothing else to mask it. No traffic, no neighbors, just silence. And then that knock. I was in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the couch with my laptop open, a half-finished show playing quietly in the background. I paused it immediately, the sudden silence making the house feel even more empty. I stayed still for a few seconds listening. Nothing. I glanced at the clock on my screen. 1:17 a.m. Too late for someone to be casually knocking on a door. Too early for it to feel like a mistake. I waited, expecting it to happen again. It didn't. The silence stretched out, filling the space where the sound had been. I exhaled, slowly shaking my head a little. Probably nothing. I muttered to myself. Maybe it was the house settling, or something outside. The wind. It had to be something like that. I hit play on my laptop again, trying to ignore it. But I couldn't focus. My attention kept drifting back to the front door, to the memory of that sound. The rhythm of it. It hadn't been random. It had felt deliberate. A few minutes passed. Maybe 5, maybe less. Then it came again. 3 knocks. This time louder. Clear enough that there was no mistaking it. My body went still instantly. My eyes moved slowly toward the door, my heart starting to beat a little faster now. That wasn't the wind. That wasn't the house. That was someone. I stayed seated for a few seconds waiting, hoping it wouldn't happen again. But it did. 3 knocks. Same spacing. Same rhythm. Like whoever was outside knew I was there. Like they were waiting for me to respond. I closed my laptop slowly, the screen going dark, and stood up. The floor creaked softly under my weight, the sound echoing more than usual in the quiet house. Each step toward the door felt heavier than it should have. Slower, like something in the back of my mind was telling me not to go any closer. When I reached the door, I didn't open it right away. I just stood there, staring at it, listening. No movement, no footsteps, no voice, just silence. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding smaller than I expected. No response. I waited a few seconds, then leaned slightly toward the door, trying to hear anything on the other side. Nothing. My hand hovered near the lock, hesitating. This didn't feel normal. If someone needed help, they would say something, knock again, do anything besides stand there in silence. And yet, they hadn't. I tightened my grip on the handle, hesitating for one more second before unlocking the door. Slowly, carefully, I pulled it open. The night air hit me immediately, cool and still. The street outside was empty, completely empty. No one on the porch, no one in the yard, no movement anywhere. The dim streetlight at the end of the road flickered faintly, casting weak shadows across the pavement. I stepped out slightly, looking left, then right. Nothing. My chest tightened as confusion settled in. There was nowhere someone could have gone that fast without making noise. No footsteps. No doors closing. No sign of anyone leaving. I stepped back inside and closed the door, locking it again. My movement's automatic now. It's nothing I said quietly, more to reassure myself than anything else. Just your imagination. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. I walked back toward the living room slowly, my eyes drifting toward the windows as I passed them. The glass reflected the inside of the house more than the outside, turning everything into a faint mirror. I caught a glimpse of myself in one of them pale tents watching. I sat back down on the couch, but I didn't open my laptop again. I just sat there listening, waiting. The silence felt different now, thicker, like something had changed the moment I opened that door. And then, it happened again. 3 knocks. My entire body tensed instantly. But this time, it wasn't coming from the front door. It was closer, from the side of the house, near the window. I turned slowly, my heart starting to pound harder as my eyes locked onto the curtain beside me. The fabric shifted slightly, just enough to show that the window behind it wasn't completely still. The knocking came again. 3 times, right against the glass. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body felt frozen, my breath shallow as I stared at the curtain, waiting for it to move again, waiting for something to appear behind it. Nothing did. But the feeling didn't go away. That heavy, suffocating sense that someone was standing just outside, close enough to touch the window, close enough to see inside. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move. Slowly, carefully, I stood up and took a step toward the curtain. Then another. My hand lifted, hovering near the edge of the fabric. The knocking stopped, completely. The silence hit harder than the sound. I hesitated for a second, my fingers trembling slightly, before I pulled the curtain back just enough to see. The yard was empty. No one there. No shadow. No movement. Just darkness. I stared for a few seconds, trying to process it, trying to understand how someone could knock that close and then disappear without a trace. I let the curtain fall back into place slowly, my chest tightening as the confusion started to shift into something else. Fear. Real fear. I stepped back, my eyes scanning the room, every corner, every shadow suddenly feeling different. And then, from somewhere behind me, I heard it again. 3 knocks, this time from inside the house. I didn't turn around right away because the moment those 3 knocks came from inside the house, something in my body just shut down completely, like my brain refused to accept what it had just heard. My hand was still gripping the edge of the curtain, and I could feel it trembling slightly as the heart started pounding harder and louder in my chest. The silence that followed felt wrong, heavier than anything before, like the house itself was holding its breath with me. I slowly let go of the curtain and stood there, frozen, staring forward, even though I knew the sound had come from behind me, somewhere deeper in the house. I tried to convince myself it was something else, maybe a pipe, maybe the structure settling, maybe anything that. It wasn't what it sounded like, but deep down I already knew that. It wasn't true. The rhythm had been too clear, too deliberate. 3 knocks spaced exactly the same as before, just like at the door, just like at the window, except now it was inside. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, as I forced myself to move. Inch by inch, I turned my head slowly toward the hallway. The darkness there felt different now, not just unlit, but occupied, like something was standing, just out of sight, watching, waiting. My breathing became shallow as I listened for another sound, and for a few seconds, there was nothing, just silence, stretching out, making everything feel more tense, more unreal. And then it came again. 3 knocks louder, this time coming from deeper inside the hallway. My chest tightened. Instantly. That wasn't random. That wasn't anything natural. That was movement. That was intention. I stepped back instinctively, my body reacting before I could think, my eyes fixed on the hallway as if I expected something to step out at any moment, but nothing moved, nothing appeared. The house stayed. Still, too still, and that somehow made it worse. I grabbed my phone from the couch, my fingers shaking as I held it up the screen, lighting up just enough to cut through the darkness, but not enough to reach. At the end of the hallway, the beam felt weak, fragile, like it wasn't enough to protect me from whatever was there. I took a slow step backward, then another, trying to put distance between myself and that sound, but as soon as I moved, I heard for it again, not in front of me, not in the hallway behind me. 3, and knocks. This time coming from somewhere near the kitchen. My entire body went cold. I stopped instantly, my mind racing, trying to understand how it could be in 2 places at once, how it could move that fast, without making any other sound. No footsteps, no shifting, no breathing, just those knocks appearing wherever. I wasn't looking like it was guiding me, controlling where my attention went. I turned slowly, scanning the room, the light from my phone, shaking slightly as it passed over the walls. The furniture, the empty spaces, everything looked normal, but it didn't feel normal anymore. The air felt colder, heavier, like something was filling the space that shouldn't be there. I backed toward the front door, my instincts screaming at me to leave, to get out while I still could. But just as I reached for the handle, the knocking came again 3 times directly behind me, so close that I flinched hard, my hand slipping from the door as my heart slammed against my ribs. I turned quickly, this time the fear overriding everything else, the light sweeping across the room and landing on the reflection in the window. For a split second, I thought I saw something, not clearly, not fully, just a shape standing behind me. Too tall, too still, but when I spun around, there was nothing there. The room was empty, again, completely empty. My breathing became uneven, my chest rising and falling too fast, as panic started to take over. This didn't make sense, none of it all. It made sense, but the feeling was real, that presence, that constant awareness that something was inside with me, something that could move without sound, something that knew exactly where I was at all times. And then the knocking stopped completely. No sound, no movement, just silence, pressing in from every direction. I stood there, frozen, my ears straining, trying to catch anything, any sign that it was still there, but there was nothing, and somehow that was worse because it meant it didn't need to make noise anymore. It didn't need to get my attention because now I already had it. I forced myself to move again, grabbing the door handle and unlocking it, my fingers clumsy from the shaking. I pulled the door open quickly, the cold night air rushing in as I stepped outside. Onto the porch, I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just moved down the steps and out into the yard. The street beyond was empty, quiet, the same as before, but it felt safer than the house. I stood there breathing hard, staring back at the open doorway. The darkness inside looked deeper than it should have, like it was swallowing the light instead of reflecting it, like something inside was watching me from just beyond what I could see. I didn't go back in, not alone. I called the police, my voice shaking as I tried to explain what had happened. Even as I said it out loud, it sounded impossible, but I knew what I heard. I knew what I felt. They arrived within minutes and searched the entire house, every room, every corner, every possible place. Someone they could hide. They found nothing. No forced entry, no footprints, no signs of anyone being there at all. Everything looked exactly the way it should have, like nothing had happened, like I had imagined everything. But I hadn't, because there was one thing I didn't tell them something I noticed. Just before I ran out the last set of knocks, I heard the ones right behind me. They didn't come from the hallway or the kitchen or any direction at all. They came from right next to my ear, so close I could feel the vibration. Like whoever made that sound wasn't somewhere in the house anymore. They were already standing beside me the entire time. I knew something was off the moment I stepped inside, but at first, I couldn't explain why. It was just a feeling subtle and uncomfortable, like walking into a room where the air doesn't belong to you anymore. I was 27, living alone in a mid-size apartment complex in a quiet part of the city, the kind of place where nothing really happens. Neighbors keep to themselves, doors stay closed, and nights are predictable, which is exactly why that night stood out so clearly. I had just gotten home a little after pros. 1:30 p.m., tired from work, and more focused on getting inside than paying attention to anything else. The hallway was quiet as usual, the overhead lights buzzing faintly as I walked down toward my unit. Everything looked normal. My door, I was closed. My number was right where it should be. Nothing out of place. I reached into my bag, pulled out my keys, and unlocked the door. Without thinking, pushing it open with my shoulder as I stepped inside, kicking it shut behind me like I always did. But as soon as the door clicked closed behind me, that feeling hit me again stronger this time. Something wasn't right. I stood there for a second, letting my eyes adjust to the dim light coming from the living room lamp I always left on when I went out. Everything looked the same. The couch, the table, the kitchen counter, nothing obviously wrong, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just walked into a place that wasn't mine. I exhaled slowly, trying to brush it off. Maybe I was just tired, maybe it was nothing. I dropped my bag near the door, slipped off my shoes, and walked further inside. But then I noticed it. Something small, something most people probably wouldn't even catch at first. The lamp, the one I always left on it, wasn't in the same position. It was angled slightly toward the couch instead of the wall. I stopped mid-step, my eyes locking onto it, trying to remember if I had moved it before leaving, but I couldn't remember doing that. I always left things the same way. Always the consistency made me feel in control, in a space that was entirely mine. And now something was different, just enough to feel wrong. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I had bumped it earlier. Maybe I just didn't remember, but that explanation didn't sit right. With me, I moved slowly into the living room, my eyes scanning everything more carefully. Now, the blanket on the couch slightly wrinkled the remote, not exactly where I usually left it. None of it was dramatic. Nothing looked out of place enough to scream danger, but all of it together created this quiet, unsettling sense that something had shifted while I was gone. My chest tightened slightly as I reached for my phone, instinctively checking the time again. 1:42 p.m. Too late for anyone to have been here too. Late for any reasonable explanation that involved someone else being inside my apartment. I turned toward the kitchen, my footsteps quieter, now more cautious than before. The overhead light there was off, just like I left it, but something else caught my attention. A glass, sitting near the sink. I hadn't left anything there before. I was sure of that. I stepped closer, my heartbeat picking up slightly as I stared at it. The glass wasn't dirty, it wasn't filled. It was just there like it had been, placed deliberately. My mind immediately started searching for explanations. Maybe I had used it earlier, maybe I'd forgotten, but again, it didn't feel right. None of this felt like something I would forget. I reached out slowly, my fingers hovering over the edge of the glass before I finally touched it. It was damp, not dripping, not soaked, just slightly wet like it had been used recently. My stomach dropped instantly. That didn't make sense. I hadn't been home all day. There was no reason for anything in this apartment to be wet. My breathing became shallow as I stepped back my eyes, moving quickly across the kitchen, then toward the hallway leading to my bedroom and bathroom. Everything looked normal from a distance, but now I couldn't trust that anymore. Not after what I had. I've already seen. I listened carefully, trying to hear anything, any movement, any sign that someone else might still be inside, but there was nothing, just silence thick and heavy pressing against my ears. I told myself I was overreacting, that there had to be a simple explanation for all of this, but even as I thought it, I could feel the fear starting to settle in deeper because none of it felt random. It felt deliberate, like small changes placed just carefully enough to be noticed if you were paying attention and ignored if you weren't. And that's when I realized something that made everything worse. The door I had just walked through. I was sure I locked it when I left. I always did, but when I reached back and checked it now, my fingers tightening around the handle, I felt it immediately. It wasn't locked. My heart skipped hard in my chest as I stared at it, trying to process what that meant. I never left it unlocked. Never. And yet now it was open, accessible, like anyone could have walked in at any. The time my breathing became uneven as I slowly turned back toward the apartment. The quiet no longer felt normal. It felt intentional, like something was waiting for me to notice all of this, waiting for me to understand that I wasn't alone, in a place I was supposed to be safe. And as I stood there, frozen, trying to decide what to do next, I heard something faint, barely there, but enough to make my entire body go. Still a soft movement coming from down the hallway, like a shift of weight, like someone adjusting their position just out of sight. And in that moment, I realized I hadn't made a mistake walking into the wrong apartment. Someone else had made my apartment feel like it wasn't mine anymore. I didn't move when I heard that sound from the hallway. Not at first. My body just locked in place, like if I stayed completely still, whatever was there wouldn't notice me. My eyes fixed on the dark opening where the hallway began, my breathing shallow and uneven as I tried to listen past the pounding of my own heartbeat. The silence stretched for a few seconds, heavy and suffocating, like the entire apartment was holding its breath with me. And then it came again, a faint shift closer, this time subtle, but unmistakable, like someone adjusting their stance just out of sight. My stomach dropped instantly. That wasn't the building. That wasn't a neighbor that was inside with me. I slowly tightened my grip on my phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I tried to think of what to do. Leaving seemed obvious, but something about turning my back on that hallway felt worse. Like the moment I stopped watching it, whatever was there would move faster than I could react. I took a slow step backward toward the front door, my eyes never leaving the darkness. The floor creaked softly under my weight, and the sound felt too loud, too sharp in the quiet. And as soon as it happened, the movement in the hallway stopped completely. The silence that followed was different now, not empty, but aware, like it had heard me, just as never. Clearly as I had heard it, my chest tightened as I realized I wasn't the only one listening. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as I took another step back, inch by inch, trying to create distance without making noise, but then something changed. The air felt heavier, colder, like the space between me and the hallway was no longer empty, like something had moved closer without making a sound. I raised my phone slightly, the faint light illuminating just enough of the living room to make the shadows feel deeper, more defined, but it didn't reach the hallway. It just faded into it, like the darkness was swallowing it. And for a moment, I thought I saw something not clearly, just a shift in shape where the light ended, like a figure standing just beyond it. My breath caught instantly. I froze again, my entire body rigid as I stared at that spot, trying to confirm what I was seeing. But it didn't move. It didn't step forward. It didn't disappear. It just stayed there, blending into the shadows like it didn't need to be seen clearly, to be real. My heart started pounding harder, each beat louder than the last as panic slowly began to take over. I couldn't stay there, not anymore. I needed to get out. I turned quickly, this time abandoning the slow, careful movements, and reached for the door. My hand fumbling with the lock as adrenaline hit all at once, but before I could open it, I heard it, a voice, quiet, low, coming from behind me. "You came back early." The entire body went cold. I froze, with my hand still on the handle, unable to move, unable to breathe properly. The voice wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, it was calm, almost conversational, like this was normal, like I was the one who had done something unexpected. My heart was racing so fast it felt like it might give me away. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Everything in me told me not to, but I knew I wasn't alone anymore. I knew there was someone standing in my apartment close enough to speak to me without raising their voice. I forced myself to move my fingers, finally turning the lock and pulling the door open, the cold air from the hallway outside hitting me instantly. But just as I stepped forward, I heard movement behind me fast. This time not slow, not careful a step then. Another closing the distance. My chest tightened as panic fully took over. I ran, not looking back, not stopping, just running down the hallway outside my apartment. My footsteps echoing loudly as I reached the stairwell, and I kept going until I was outside. In the open air, I didn't stop, until I was across the street turning back, only when I knew there was distance between me and that door. The apartment building looked normal, quiet, like it always did. Nothing to suggest what had just happened, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. I knew what I saw, what I heard. The police arrived within minutes and went up to check the apartment. I stayed outside, my hands still shaking my mind, replaying everything over and over, trying to make sense of it. They searched the entire unit, every room, every closet, every space someone could hide, but they didn't find anyone. No sign of forced entry, no missing items, nothing out of place. Everything looked exactly how it should have, like nothing had happened at all. One of the officers asked me if I was sure I hadn't just forgotten to lock the door or move things around before I left. I shook my head immediately. I knew my routines, I knew my space. None of that explained the glass, the lamp, a voice. They took a report, but there was nothing else they could do. No evidence, no proof, just my word against an empty apartment. I didn't go back that night. I stayed somewhere else, and when I returned the next day, everything was exactly the same. Nothing moved, nothing touched like it had reset back to normal. But there was one thing I couldn't stop thinking about, something I hadn't told the police, because I didn't realize it until later. The voice, the one that spoke to me, it didn't sound surprised. It didn't sound like someone caught off guard. It sounded like someone who had been there for a while, like someone who knew my routine, who knew when I was supposed to come home. And more than that, it sounded like someone who believed that apartment belonged to them, not me. And the worst part wasn't that someone had been inside it, was that they hadn't been trying to hide it. They had been waiting for me to notice. I didn't think anything was wrong when I first got home that night. Everything looked exactly the same as it always did. The lights were off, the house was quiet, the front door locked just the way I had left it. I was 29, living alone, in a small house at the edge of a quiet neighborhood. The kind of a place where nothing really happened, which is why I never expected anything like this to happen there. I unlocked the door, stepped inside and closed it behind me without thinking, dropping my keys onto the fire. A table like I always did, the sound echoed slightly in the silence, and for a second I just stood there letting the quiet settle around me. But something felt off, not in an obvious way. Nothing was broken, nothing was out of place, just a feeling, subtle and uncomfortable, like the air inside the house. I didn't belong to me anymore. I told myself it was nothing, just the late hour, just being tired. I walked further in, flipping on the living room light, the warm glow filling the space instantly. Everything. It looked normal. The couch, the table, the shelves, nothing had been moved, nothing was missing. I let out a small breath, trying to relax, but the feeling didn't go away. It stayed there in the background, quiet but persistent, like something waiting just beneath the surface. I walked into the kitchen next, turning on the light and glancing around quickly. Everything was exactly how I left it, clean, organized, nothing unusual. I opened the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and took a sip, trying to shake off the unease. But then I noticed something small, something I almost missed. The cabinet above the sink was slightly open, not wide, just a few inches. I froze for a second, staring at it. I knew I had closed it before I left. I always did. I reached out, slowly, and pushed it shut, the sound of it clicking into place louder than it should have been. In the quiet house, my chest tightened slightly as I stepped back, my eyes moving around the kitchen again more carefully, this time checking for anything else out of this place. But everything looked fine too. Fine. Like nothing had been disturbed at all. I turned off the light and stepped into the hallway leading to the bedrooms. The darkness there felt deeper than usual, like the light from the living room didn't reach as far as it normally did. I hesitated for a second before moving forward, my footsteps quieter, now more cautious than before. The floor creaked softly under my weight, the sound echoing slightly as I moved toward my bedroom door. It was closed, just like I left it. I reached for the handle and paused, my hand hovering there, as that feeling returned stronger this time. Something wasn't right. Something inside me was telling me not to open that door, but I couldn't just stand there. I had to know. I turned the handle slowly and pushed the door open just enough to look inside. The room was dark, the curtains drawn, blocking out most of the light from outside. I stepped in and reached for the switch, flipping it on. The light filled the room instantly. Everything. I looked normal. The bed was made, the dresser untouched, nothing out of place. I let out a breath. I didn't realize I was holding and stepped further inside, but as I moved, I noticed something else, something that made my stomach tighten. Air in the room felt colder, not just slightly, but enough that I could feel it against my skin, like the window had been open for a while. But when I looked at it, the window was closed, locked exactly how I left it. I walked closer, checking it anyway, my fingers brushing against the glass. It was cold from the outside, but that didn't explain the temperature inside the room. I stepped back slowly, my eyes scanning the space again more carefully. This time, that's when I saw it. The closet door, slightly setted. Opened. My heart skipped instantly. I knew I had closed it before leaving. I always did. I stood there, staring at it for a few seconds, trying to convince myself it was nothing, that maybe I had forgotten, but it didn't feel like that. It felt intentional, like something had been pow. I moved, not by accident, but on purpose. I took a slow step forward, then another, breathing shallow as I got closer. The gap in the door just wide enough to show darkness inside, deeper than the rest of the room, like it was absorbing the light. Instead of reflecting it, I reached out slowly, my hand hovering near the edge of the door, hesitating just for a second before I pushed it open wider. The hinges creaked softly, the sound echoing in the quiet room. The inside of the closet looked normal: clothes, hanging shoes on the floor, nothing out of place, and yet the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got worse, stronger, like I had just gotten closer to something I wasn't supposed to see. I stepped back instinctively, my heart starting to beat faster as I turned away from the closet, trying to shake off the feeling. But then I heard it, a sound faint, almost unnoticeable. But there, a shift behind me inside the room. My entire body went still. I slowly turned my head back toward the closet, the door still. I opened the darkness inside unchanged, but now the silence felt different, heavier, like something had just moved and stopped. The moment I noticed it, my breath caught in my throat as I stared at it, trying to see something, anything that would explain what I had just heard, but there was nothing, no movement. No shadow, nothing visible. And that was when I realized something that made everything worse. The sound I heard didn't come from inside the closet. It came from behind me, inside the room, like something had stepped closer the moment I turned away. I didn't turn around immediately, because the moment I realized the sound had come from behind me, my entire body just locked in place, like something inside me knew that if I moved too fast, it would make things worse. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it was echoing through the room, and I could hear every breath I took, sharp and uneven, in the silence. I stood there, staring at the closet, trying to convince myself I was wrong, that I had misheard it, that there was some logical explanation, but the feeling in the room had changed completely. It wasn't empty anymore. It felt occupied, like the air itself had weight to it, like something was standing just a few feet behind me, close enough that if I moved the wrong way, I would run. Into it, I swallowed hard, my throat dry as I forced myself to breathe slowly, trying to stay quiet, trying not to give away exactly where I was, even though deep down I already knew it didn't matter. Whatever was in the room already knew I was there. I could feel it. I tightened my grip on my phone, my fingers shaking slightly as I slowly started to turn. Inch by inch, my eyes scanning the space behind me, the bed, the dresser, the corner near the door. Everything looked exactly the same, nothing out of place, nothing moving, and yet the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got worse, stronger, like I had just confirmed something I wasn't supposed to understand. I took a slow step backward, my breathing shallow, my eyes never stopping their movement, checking every shadow, every corner, waiting for something to shift, something to reveal itself. But nothing did. The room stayed still, too still, like it was waiting for me to make the next move. And that's when I heard it again, a sound, soft, controlled, coming from the other side of the room near the door. My heart slammed against my ribs as I turned quickly this time, the fear overriding everything else. The beam of light from my phone sweeping across the space and landing on the door. It was closed, just like I left it, but something about it looked wrong. Not open, not broken, just off, like it had been touched recently. I stared at it for a second, my mind racing, trying to figure out what was wrong, and then I saw it. The handle slowly turning my entire body. I went cold. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe properly as I watched it shift just slightly enough to confirm that it wasn't my imagination. Someone was on the other side of that door inside the house with me. The realization hit me all at once, sharp and overwhelming. I wasn't dealing with something in the closet. I wasn't alone in the room. I wasn't even alone in the house. There was someone else there moving quietly, staying just out of sight, controlling where I looked, and when I saw them, the door stopped moving, the handle returning to its original position. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything before, like whoever was out there had paused just to see how I would react. I stepped back slowly, my body shaking now. As panic started to take over, I needed to get out. I couldn't stay there, not with someone else inside, not with someone who clearly knew how to move without being seen. I turned toward the window for a second, considering it, but I was on the second floor. There was no safe way. Down, my only option was the front door. I moved quickly now. No longer trying to stay quiet, my footsteps louder as I crossed the room and into the hallway, my eyes darting around, expecting to see something move at any moment, but the house stayed still, too still, like it was letting me go, like it didn't need to stop me. Yet I reached the front door, my hands fumbling with the lock as adrenaline took over. I pulled it open and ran out into the night, the cold air hitting me instantly as I stumbled onto the porch. I didn't stop until I was off the steps and halfway down the yard, turning back only when I knew there was distance between me and the house. The front door was still open, the inside dark and silent, nothing moving, nothing visible, and yet I knew someone was still in there. I called the police, my voice shaking as I tried to explain what had happened. Even as I said it out loud, it sounded impossible, but I knew what I heard. I knew what I saw. They arrived quickly and went inside, checking every room, every closet, every space where someone could hide. I stood outside waiting, my arms wrapped around myself, trying to stop the shaking, but it wouldn't go away, not completely. When they came back out, they told me they didn't find anyone, no signs of forced entry, no evidence that anyone had been inside at all. Everything looked normal, just like it should have been, like nothing had happened. But I knew better, because there was one thing I didn't tell them, something I realized only after I was already outside standing there, looking back at the house, the closet. The door I had opened earlier, it wasn't wide open when I left. It wasn't even halfway. It was almost closed, like someone had pushed it shut from the inside after I turned away, which meant whatever I thought, it was in there, wasn't trying to get out. It was already out moving through the house before I even realized I wasn't alone. It started with a phone call I almost didn't answer because it was late and I didn't recognize the number, and nothing good ever comes from unknown calls after midnight. I was 26, living alone in a small apartment on the 3rd, a floor of an older building, the kind with thin walls and long quiet. Hallways where every sound carries just enough to make you aware of how alone you are at night. I was already in bed, lights off, phone charging on the nightstand when it started ringing, the sound cutting. Sharply through the silence, I stared at the screen for a second, watching the number I didn't know flash across it. My first instinct was to ignore it, let it go to voicemail like I always did, but something made me hesitate. Something about the timing. Maybe it was just curiosity. Maybe it was something else. I reached over and answered it, holding the phone to my ear but not saying anything at first, just listening. "Hello," I said after a few seconds, my voice quiet, slightly unsure. There was no response, just silence, not even background noise, not breathing, not movement, just nothing. I frowned, pulling the phone away slightly to check if the call had dropped, but it was still connected, the timer still running. I brought it back to my phone. "Ear, hello," I said again, a little louder this time. Still nothing. The silence on the other end felt different, not empty, but deliberate, like someone was there choosing not to speak. I felt a small chill run through me, and after a few more seconds I hung up, shaking my head slightly, telling myself it was just a wrong number or a bad connection. Nothing worth thinking about. I set the phone back down and rolled onto my side, closing my eyes, trying to fall asleep again, but I couldn't shake the phone, feeling that something about that call wasn't normal. The silence. I had felt too intentional, Like whoever was on the other end had heard me, but didn't want me to hear them. A few minutes passed, maybe 5, maybe less, before the phone rang again. The same number. My eyes opened immediately, my heart starting to beat a little faster. Now I stared at the screen longer this time, debating whether or not to answer, but eventually I picked it up again. "Who is this?" I asked, this time skipping the hesitation. Skipping the polite greeting. The silence was still there, the same as before, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt closer, like the person on the other end was listening more carefully, like they were waiting for me to say something specific. If this is a joke, it's not funny. I added my voice tighter, now more alert. Still, nothing. No response, no movement. Just that same heavy silence pressing against my ear. I hung up again more quickly this time, my chest tightening slightly as unease started to replace curiosity. I sat up in bed, now no longer trying to sleep, my eyes moving around the room automatically, even though I knew there was nothing there. Everything looked normal. The door closed, the window shut, the familiar shape of furniture in the dark, nothing out of place. And yet the feeling didn't go away. The phone buzzed again, the same number a third time. My heart jumped slightly at the sound. I stared at it, not answering this time, just watching it ring, until it stopped. A notification appeared. Seconds later, a voicemail. I hesitated before opening it, my thumb hovering over the screen as that same feeling returned, stronger now, heavier, like something was building just beneath the surface. I pressed play. The audio started with static, faint, uneven, like interference, then silence, and then a sound. Not clear, not loud, just barely there, but enough to recognize. Breathing, slow, steady, close. My chest tightened instantly. I replayed it, bringing the phone closer to my ear, focusing on it. The breathing didn't change, didn't shift. It stayed consistent, like whoever recorded it wasn't moving at all, just there, listening. My stomach dropped as a thought hit me. The call hadn't been a mistake. It hadn't been random. Someone had been on the other end listening to me, and now they had sent me proof that they were still there, still paying attention. I locked my phone and set it down, my hands slightly unsteady now as I tried to think rationally. Maybe it was spam, maybe it was some kind of recording, maybe there was an explanation, but even as I thought it, I didn't. I believe it. The timing, the silence, the breathing, it all felt too specific, too controlled. I stood up slowly, moving toward the bedroom door, my footsteps quiet as I reached for the handle and paused. I'm listening for anything on the other side. The hallway was silent, just like it always was. No footsteps, no voices, nothing unusual. I opened the door slowly and stepped out into the apartment, turning on the light as I did. The brightness made everything feel normal again, at least for a second. The living room empty, the kitchen, still nothing out of place. I walked through it, checking everything without really thinking, just needing to confirm that I was alone, that nothing had changed. But as I reached the center of the apartment, my phone buzzed again, the sound sharper, this time louder in the quiet space. I turned quickly, looking back toward the bedroom where I had left it on the bed, the screen lighting up in the darkness. I walked back slowly, my heart beating faster with each step. The number was the same again. I picked it up, staring at it for a second before answering. This time I didn't say anything. I just listened, waiting. The silence was there again, but now it felt different, heavier, closer. Then, quietly, almost too soft to hear a voice. You turned the light on. My entire body went cold. I didn't move, didn't speak, couldn't breathe properly as the words sank in. The voice wasn't guessing, it wasn't random. I was describing exactly what I had just done in real time. And that's when I realized something that made everything worse. The call wasn't coming from somewhere far away. It was coming from somewhere close enough to see me. I didn't respond when I heard the voice, because the moment it said that, my entire body just shut down, like my brain couldn't process how someone on the phone could know exactly what I had just done. My grip tightened around the phone, my fingers shaking slightly as I stood there in the middle of my bedroom, staring at nothing, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was echoing through the entire apartment. The silence on the line didn't last long this time. I could still hear the breathing, faint, steady, like whoever was there wasn't in a hurry, wasn't nervous, just waiting for me to react, waiting for me to understand what was happening. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as I forced myself to speak. "Who is this?" My voice came out, weaker than I expected, barely steady. The breathing didn't change, didn't hesitate, and then the voice came again, quiet, controlled. You weren't in bed before. My stomach dropped instantly. My eyes moved around the room without thinking, scanning everything. The door, the closet, the window. Every corner suddenly felt wrong, like something could be watching from any of them. My chest tightened painfully as the realization hit me all at once. They weren't guessing. They weren't making random comments. They were describing me in real time. I backed up slowly toward the wall, my phone pressed tightly against my ear like I needed to keep listening, even though every part of me wanted to hang up, wanted to pretend none of this was real. "Stop," I said quickly, my voice shaking now. "Stop calling me." There was a pause, just a second, but it felt longer, stretched out in that silence. And then the voice spoke again, softer, this time almost calm. Why I couldn't answer. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of something. That didn't make sense. My eyes moved toward the window. Instinctively, the curtains were drawn, but I could see faint movement behind them from the streetlights outside. Shadows shifting slightly as cars passed by, but nothing clear. Nothing that explained how someone ride. I could see me this clearly. I turned toward the door. Next, it was still open, leading into the living room. The light from there spilling into the bedroom, making everything feel exposed, like I was standing in the middle of something instead of inside a safe space. My breathing became uneven as I took another step backward, my back hitting the wall, the cold surface grounding me slightly, but not enough to stop the panic building in my chest. "Where are you?" I asked, suddenly the words slipping out before I could stop them. The silence returned heavier than before, like the person on the other end was considering the question, and for a moment, I thought maybe they wouldn't answer. Maybe it would just stay like that, but then quietly, almost casually, the voice responded. "Close." My entire body went cold, my grip on the phone tightening so hard it hurt. I felt a wave of panic rush through me, stronger now, sharper, pushing past everything else. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't just stand in that room knowing someone could see me, knowing they were close enough to describe everything I was doing. I moved quickly this time, no longer trying to stay calm or quiet. I stepped out of the bedroom into the living room, my eyes scanning everything more urgently. Now, the couch, the kitchen, the hallway, nothing moved. Nothing looked out of place, but the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got worse, like I had just stepped further into something, instead of away from it. The phone was still at my ear, the breathing, still there, steady, unchanged, like they were following me without moving. "You're in the living room now," the voice said softly. My heart slammed against my ribs. I spun around instinctively, my eyes darting toward the windows, the door, a hallway, trying to find where it was coming from, but there was nothing, no one, no movement, just the same quiet apartment I had always known, except now it felt completely different, like it didn't belong to me anymore, like I had walked into someone else's space without realizing it. "How can you see me?" I asked, my voice breaking slightly, the words coming out faster, now more desperate. The silence that followed felt longer this time, heavier, like the answer mattered more than anything else. And then, finally, the voice spoke again, slower, this time deliberate. "I never left." My breath caught instantly, my entire body freezing. As those words settled in my mind, I didn't understand at first. Not completely, but the meaning behind them was clear enough to make my chest tighten painfully. I turned slowly, my eyes moving toward the hallway again. The darkness there, deeper than the rest of the apartment, like it was hiding something. Instead of just lacking light, my hands started to shake uncontrollably now, the phone slipping slightly in my grip as I tried to hold onto it, tried to stay focused, but it was getting harder, harder to think, harder to breathe, harder to understand what was happening around me. And then I heard it, not through the phone, not from outside, but from inside the apartment, a sound, faint but unmistakable, a step coming from down the hallway. My entire body locked up. I pulled the phone away from my ear instinctively, but the call was still active, the breathing still there, the voice no longer speaking because it didn't need to anymore. I wasn't just hearing them through the phone. Now I was hearing them in the same space as me. I didn't wait. I didn't think. I turned and ran straight for the front door, my hands fumbling with the lock as panic took over completely. I pulled it open and rushed out into the hallway of the building, my footsteps loud, now echoing off the walls. As I moved away from the apartment as fast as I could, I didn't stop until I reached the stairwell, my chest heaving, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. The phone was still in my hand, the call still active. I brought it back to my ear, slowly, my heart still racing, and for a second there was nothing, no breathing, no sound, just silence. And then quietly, almost as a whisper, the voice came back. "You left too early." I hung up immediately, my hands shaking as I stared at the screen, my mind trying to catch up with everything that had just happened. The police came. Later, they searched the apartment, checked everything found. Nothing. No sign of forced entry, no hidden cameras, no explanation for any of it. But there was one thing I didn't tell them, something I noticed only after everything was over when I checked my call history. The number that had been calling me, it wasn't unknown. It was listed as coming from inside my own apartment, and somehow even now, I still can't explain how someone could call me from a place I had just been standing in while also watching me from somewhere I couldn't see. I didn't notice anything wrong when I first got home that night. Everything looked exactly the same as it always did. The lights were off, the house was quiet, the front door locked, just the way I left it. I was 30, living alone in a small 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood, the place where nothing unusual ever happened, which is why I never expected anything like this to happen there. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind me without thinking, dropping my keys onto the plating. Table as I always did. The sound echoed slightly in the silence, and for a moment I just stood there, letting my eyes adjust to the dark. But something felt off, not in a way I could immediately explain. Just a subtle shift in the air, like the space didn't belong entirely to me anymore. I told myself it was nothing, just being tired, just a long day. I reached for the light switch and turned it on. The living room filled with warm light. Instantly, everything looked normal. The couch, the table, the shelves. Nothing out of place. I walked further in my footsteps, soft against the floor as I moved toward the kitchen. The house was completely silent. No background noise, no movement, just that stillness that usually felt peaceful but now felt heavier, like something was pressing against it. I opened the fridge, grabbed a drink, and took a sip, trying to shake off the unease. But then I noticed something small, something I almost missed. The chair at the kitchen table was slightly pulled out. Not far, just a few inches. I stopped staring at it, trying to remember if I had left it like that, but I couldn't. I always pushed the chairs in, always kept everything neat. It was a habit I didn't even think about anymore. I stepped closer, slowly, my chest tightening as I looked around the kitchen more carefully. Nothing else seemed out of place. The counters were clean, the sink empty, the back door closed and locked exactly how it should be. But that chair, it didn't feel like something I had done. It felt like something had been moved after I left. I pushed it back into place, the sound of it scraping lightly against the floor, louder than it should have been. In the quiet room, I paused, listening for anything, any reaction, any movement, but there was nothing. Just silence again. I exhaled slowly, trying to calm myself. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe I had just forgotten something simple. I turned off the kitchen light and walked toward the hallway leading to the rest of the house. The darkness there felt deeper than usual, like the light from the living room wasn't reaching as far as it normally did. I hesitated for a second before continuing my steps slower, now more cautious than before. The floor creaked softly under my weight, the sound echoing slightly. As I moved toward the stairs, I wasn't planning to go upstairs. Yet I just wanted to check that everything was fine, that nothing else had been moved. But halfway down the hallway, I stopped something else, caught my attention. A faint smell, not strong, not overwhelming, but noticeable, something slightly metallic mixed with dampness, like something that didn't belong in a clean house. My chest tightened slightly as I tried to place it, but I couldn't. It wasn't something I recognized, I felt wrong. I stood there for a moment listening again. The silence pressed in, around me heavier now, more suffocating than before. And then I heard a sound so faint I almost missed it, a soft shift coming from upstairs. My entire body went still. I held my breath, trying to listen. More clearly, the sound didn't come again right away, and for a second I thought maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was just the house settling. But then it came again. Another subtle movement, slightly louder, this time unmistakable, my heart. I started beating faster, my eyes moving slowly toward the top of the stairs, the darkness. There felt thicker, like it was hiding something instead of just being unlit. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as I took a step back instinctively, my body reacting before I could. I think I didn't want to go up there, not yet. Every instinct in me was telling me to leave, to get out of the house, to not confirm what I was already starting to believe. But I couldn't just ignore it. I couldn't pretend. I hadn't heard it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, turning on the flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness, but not reaching all the way to the top of the stairs. It just faded into it, like the light wasn't strong enough to push it back. I took a slow step, forward, then another. my breathing shallow, my eyes fixed on the upper floor, waiting for something to move, something to show itself. But nothing did. The house stayed still, too still, like it was waiting for me to make the next move. And then I heard it again, closer, this time a step from upstairs. The entire body went cold as the realization hit me all at once. I hadn't just walked into an empty house. I had walked into a house where someone was already waiting. I didn't go up the stairs, not at first, because the moment I realized that sound was coming from upstairs, something inside me just refused to move forward, like my body understood the danger. Before my mind could fully process it, my grip tightened around my phone, the flashlight beam shaking slightly. As I stood there, staring into the darkness at the top of the stairs, my heart pounding so hard, it felt like it was echoing through the entire house. I held my breath, trying to listen past the sound of the rain faint against the windows, and then it came again. A step, slow, deliberate, unmistakable. My entire body went cold. That wasn't random. That wasn't the house settling. That was someone moving upstairs inside my house. I took a slow step backward, my instincts screaming at me to leave, to get out, while I still could. But something kept me there. Not curiosity, not courage. Something else. Something like the need to confirm what I already knew. I raised the light slightly, trying to push it further up the summon, a staircase, but it only reached halfway. The rest swallowed by shadow, like the darkness itself was resisting it. I stood there frozen for a second longer, and then I heard something that made everything worse, breathing faint but real coming. From above, not loud, not rushed, just steady, controlled, like whoever was up there wasn't hiding, wasn't afraid. They were waiting. My chest tightened painfully as panic started to rise. I couldn't stay there, not with someone above me, not with someone who clearly knew I was inside. I turned quickly, this time abandoning the hesitation, and moved toward the front door, my footsteps faster, now louder, no longer trying to stay quiet. But just as I reached the hallway, the sound upstairs changed. The movement stopped. Completely. The silence that followed felt heavier than wealth. Anything before, like whoever had been walking, had paused just to listen to me, just to track where I was going. I froze, mid-step, my breath catching. As the realization hit me, they knew where I was. They were paying attention to every sound I made, every movement I took. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as I forced myself to move again slower, this time more controlled. I couldn't panic, not yet. I needed to get out without letting them get closer. I reached the front door, my hand hovering over the lock, when I heard a sound from behind me. Not upstairs, not far away, but from the hallway. I had just walked through a soft creak like a step. My entire body locked up. I turned slowly, my heart racing as the light from my phone swept across the hallway. Nothing moved, nothing visible, but the feeling was there, stronger now, closer, like whatever had been upstairs wasn't there anymore. I stepped back instinctively, my breathing uneven as I tried to understand how it could have moved that fast without making more noise, without me hearing it clearly. And then I realized something worse. It hadn't moved quickly. I had just been focused on the stairs while it moved somewhere else in the house. Somewhere closer to me. I grip on the phone, my hand shaking as I raised the light higher, scanning every corner, every shadow, waiting for something to reveal itself. But nothing did. The house stayed still, too still, like it was letting me imagine where it was instead of showing me. And that was worse because I couldn't see it, I couldn't predict it, I couldn't know how close it actually was. I turned back toward the door, forcing myself to act before I lost control completely, my fingers finally grabbing the lock. But just as I started to turn it, I heard it right behind me, a breath, close enough that I felt it against the back of my neck. My entire body went cold. I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't even breathe properly for a second. I just stood there, frozen, the realization hitting me all at once. It wasn't upstairs anymore. It wasn't across the house. It was right there behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Everything in me told me not to, because if I did, whatever was there wouldn't be hidden anymore. It would be real, fully visible, and I didn't know if I could handle that. I forced myself to move my hand, finally turning the lock, the sound loud in the silence. I pulled the door open, quickly stumbling forward onto the porch. The cold night, air hitting me instantly. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I ran, down the steps and into the yard, my heart racing, my breathing out of control. I didn't stop until I reached the street. Only then did I turn back. The house stood there, quiet, dark, nothing moving, nothing visible. The front door still open, the inside barely visible. From where I stood, the police arrived within minutes. They searched the entire house, every room, every closet, every possible place someone could hide, but they found nothing. No. Forced entry. No signs of anyone being there at all. Everything. I looked exactly as it should have been, like nothing had happened. But I knew that wasn't true because there was one thing I didn't tell them, something I realized only after I was outside standing there. Looking back at the house when I had first come in, the front door had been locked just like I left it, which meant whoever was inside hadn't broken in. They hadn't forced their way in. They had been there before I even got home, waiting inside my house long before I walked through that door. And the worst part wasn't that they had been there. It was that they had been close enough to follow me through the house without making a sound, and somehow close enough to stand right behind me without me ever seeing them until it was already too late.